I wanted to start by stepping back a wee bit and to talk about the fact that we're already experiencing the fourth industrial revolution. And I was reading something last night and it talked about the fourth industrial revolution and how it's going to impact upon us, and that it's likely to be experienced and the full extent of the experience is not likely to be seen for several decades yet. But it was a call to action that we must now work to position Ireland to respond to the profound changes we're going to see. And I read it and I thought, yes, that's really applicable in the area of BIM and BIM technology and how we deploy it in this area. The text I was reading wasn't in fact in any way connected to the BIM environment. In fact, it was the opening lines of the innovation pillar of Future Jobs framework. So I thought for me it was mindful to set a context of actually that this is happening all around about us, and not just in the BIM environment. But of course everything is interconnected, and everything will change. I mean, the way we select, the way we value, the way we compare construction products going forward, and is likely to be hugely disrupted and at a tremendous pace because of the automation, the interconnectedness, and the customization that's now possible. The last two times I've been in this room were to speak to international delegates who are here in Ireland preparing standards in the area of blockchain and artificial intelligence. And I spoke to a room of probably 150 people in both cases. So there's a huge amount happening all around about us from my perspective on a standards basis in terms of what we're doing. And I see that impacting on our built environment. The folk that I had in this room 2 weeks ago and a month before that, they were talking about connected communities, they were talking about smart cities, how the Internet of Things, how AI, blockchain were all going to impact. And there is no doubt about it that the future is going to be one of significant change. And that's what's happening on a very broad basis. But in the standards community, we're also looking at the area of BIM and the whole entire BIM framework. And while I want to talk to you in main about BIM certification provided by the NSAI, what I thought it would be useful for just a moment to do would be to step back and look at the BIM framework such as it is. And the BIM framework and certification derives from an international ISO standard that has been adopted by Europe, this ISO 19650. But that in fact is a suite of standards. There's 4 standards in play at the moment. The first one has been published, and that, as you're probably aware, looks at concepts and principles. The second one is looking at the delivery phase of assets, and that's the one where we're currently basing the certification scheme. But there's 2 more in development, and I suppose it's important that you're aware that the work in terms of standardisation is ongoing and continuing. And those are in terms of the operational phase of assets, and then getting more specific in terms of security-minded building assets. And I'll come back to what we're doing in Ireland in terms of tracking and monitoring that towards the end. But it is to say that there's a lot of work ongoing, and what we're finding in the National Standards Authority is that work is interconnected in a way that we've never seen before. Previously, we could operate a construction area, we could operate a manufacturing area. Now there's complete mobility as in between the standards that are being developed and the norms that we are codifying. Let's say for blockchain, which had its origins, as you know, in fintech, are now suddenly becoming an issue in so many other areas. And I suppose that's the one thing I want to say to you here today is to keep your minds open to the broader developments that are happening, because they will all ultimately feed back into yourselves, and they will impact, and BIM will be the facilitator for that into the future. So turning to to our own certification. And as I mentioned to you, I'm delighted to say that we are offering third-party certification to that part two that I referenced before. And I was looking back, it was about 12 months ago since I've been here before, and at that time the standard was not long published. We were talking about producing and developing a pilot project, training our auditors and working through that. So that work has all been completed. We worked in conjunction with colleagues from BRE who are also here to upscale and train our auditors. We then engaged with a number of client companies on a pilot basis, because it's one thing having the standards, it's quite another to put that into practice and to work through what it means from a certification perspective. We've done that, and now we're at the position where we've developed a questionnaire to prepare industry for engagement with the standard and indeed with certification. And that also has had the benefit of our standards group in terms of the questions that we're asking. So that is underway. The questionnaire will be available for use by industry. So it's key then for applicants to be able to demonstrate, this is a management system audit, so applicants will have to demonstrate that they comply with the standard, and the standard deals with all aspects of the process, as you would imagine. So it looks at the assessment of need, tendering, how you tender, how you're invited, how you manage that, how you respond to the tender, how you, if selected, how you mobilise, and how you manage the information right through project closeout. So, and then within that, standard envisages and looks at the different types of actors who might be engaging in that process and sets out requirements for those individual actors. So a company who's applying for certification, depending on the company, may apply for one particular actor or indeed for all. Now, because it's a management system audit, it does have its origins in the tradition of ISO 9001. Now, it's not essential for you to get ISO 9001, but if you don't have ISO 9001, and of course from a sales perspective, I'd be encouraging everybody to get 9001 as well at the same time, but leaving that aside, without ISO 9001, there's a little bit extra work to do, because you've got to go back and consider those original management systems issues. So that's issues like risk, competence, what your documentation system is like, how you manage internal audit, and how you review findings from that. So it's probably your day-to-day business, but maybe something that you haven't looked at and put on a formal basis. And then that all together forms the detail that our auditors will be looking at. And again, the self-assessment questionnaire that we've developed will allow you to walk through some of that, and we'll pose some challenging questions so that you have an opportunity to assess where you're at in that piece. And because it's a management system audit, it's a two-stage audit. So there's a registration audit which checks how your systems are. That will give you initial findings, and then it's followed through with the final audit. And as I mentioned, we have started formal certification, and indeed I'm glad to say we have issued our first certificate, and our first client who has been certified is TJ O'Connor and Associates, and I just want to do a shout out to them. They participated in the pilot and have come through all of that process. And I thought it was interesting. This is their response to what it was like going through the process. And so for me, what was the most profound, the most connected piece was where they say it's critical in adding value to their client service to enable them to achieve the very best of international standards of information and collaborative project management procedures, both internally and with external teams. So straight away there's that concept of delivering added value. I mean, I think more importantly, as time goes on, I would see BIM certification being a requirement at a first instance in public contracts, but no doubt in large-scale private contracts as well. So there'll be multiple drivers going forward for this. And I want to turn very quickly to what we're doing from a standards perspective, because I did say I wanted to touch on that. And leaving aside the numbers, I know Ralph, you'll be quite familiar with all these numbers and comfortable with them. Others of you might say, how would you regard those? But basically what the NSAI does is that when there's a significant body of work happening at either European or international level, we establish a shadow committee or a mirror committee. And that mirror committee is drawn up of industry representatives. And the purpose of the committee is to monitor or shadow what's going on, either in the European Forum or indeed in the International Forum. So this committee is looking at, in the first instance, is looking at what's happening with those other two standards that are still in development that I mentioned at the start. And they're also looking at the broader context of standards that will ultimately impact upon BIM and its broader application. So they're looking at, the group are looking at further digitisation standards, and there's quite a lot of work, and because of time I decided not to go into the detail of this. Happy to provide it to anybody that might be interested in this, but it's the purpose is very much to keep going with the structure of standards and specifications, and to ensure that Ireland has that very close cooperation both with the international and the European organisations. And I suppose one critical aspect of this work is from an Irish context, whether or not we should have a national annex to the BIM standards. And with this in mind, the shadow group, the mirror committee, have established a working group, and that working group is looking to see, well, is there a need? Does it make sense to put in yet another standard or another set of requirements, or is the standard as it is sufficient? Because it's not up to me or the NSAI colleagues to make that decision. That's ultimately the decision for the people in this room. And once we get that recommendation, and if there is a recommendation to develop an annex, then that will flow further back through the working group to develop that annex further. So that's the whistle-stop tour of NSAI certification, our standards work. I'd very much welcome further participation from anybody in the room in the standards work, in the committee activity, or indeed, of course, from a certification perspective. That's details of our website, and indeed, you can also leave a specific email address if you're interested in quotations or indeed copies of standards, so that'll get you straight to us. So, thank you very much. Thank you.